carried to the neck and stoned, to executions staged on children's soccer fields, the ways different nations deliver the ultimate punishment are both horrifying and extreme. Some deaths come quickly, while others unfold in prolonged agony. This is a glimpse into death row executions across the globe, and some of these methods are so brutal they'll leave you utterly speechless. Number 7. The United States, Justice and Contradiction. Crimes and punishments have always been debated, but none spark more controversy than the death penalty, the state's ultimate act of authority. And when you think of freedom and democracy, the last place you might expect to find an execution chamber is in the United States. Yet, here we are, a nation that preaches liberty while still holding the power to legally end a life. It's a paradox wrapped in legal jargon and moral gray zones. Every year, roughly 20 people are sentenced to death in the United States, but surprisingly, the country doesn't even rank among the world's top 10 executioners. Why? Because while death sentences are handed out, actual executions are relatively rare, often delayed for decades or never carried out at all. Here's where things get complicated. The death penalty is legal in 27 states, but 6 of those have moratoriums, meaning technically legal, but not in use. 23 states have abolished it entirely, while 4, California, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, have paused executions despite keeping the law on the books. So, depending on where you live, killing someone could get you the death penalty or life in prison with the possibility of parole. Justice, it seems, has a zip code. In 2024, the United States recorded 26 death sentences and 25 executions. The 10th consecutive year, the numbers stayed below 50. Most of those took place in a familiar trio of states: Texas, Oklahoma, and Florida. Meanwhile, California, the state with the largest death row population, over 600 inmates, hasn't executed anyone since 2006. It's like having a massive death row waiting room that no one ever leaves. The crimes that warrant death vary. Beyond murder, there's espionage, treason, and in rare cases, extreme drug trafficking. And while lethal injection remains the standard method, some states still offer the electric chair, firing squad, gas chamber, or hanging as alternatives. Yes, in 2025, those are still on the menu. For inmates who do make it to their final day, the process is grimly methodical, almost bureaucratic in its precision. Exactly 24 hours before execution, the prisoner is moved from their regular cell to what's chillingly known as the death house. It's their last change of scenery. Guards conduct a full-body search, issue new clothes, and escort them to the death watch cell. A sterile room where time slows down and every sound feels louder. 15 hours before execution, they're allowed a final shower and a basic prison breakfast. Then comes the last visit. Friends, family, or sometimes no one at all. The emotional weight of that moment can't be overstated. It's goodbye, and both sides know it. 12 hours before death, all visits end. The inmate gets lunch and the chance to meet with a spiritual advisor, a priest, imam, or chaplain. Some confess regrets, others say nothing at all. By the 8-hour mark, they're allowed to see the sunset one last time, a small mercy that feels almost poetic. 6 hours before, they're permitted to write letters, final words to the people they'll never see again. And then, the famous last meal. Contrary to popular myth, it's not an all-you-can-order feast. The average budget is around $30, meaning no lobster tails or steak buffets, unless the prison kitchen happens to have them lying around. Some inmates request comfort food, fried chicken, cheeseburgers, milkshakes. Others decline the meal entirely. As the clock ticks closer to the end, practicalities take over. If the execution involves the electric chair, the inmate's head is shaved to prevent their hair from catching fire. 3 hours before, witnesses, often victims' families, begin arriving, separated by one-way glass from the chamber. They can see the inmate cannot see them. At 10 minutes to go, the inmate is asked for final words. Some deliver statements of apology, others defiantly proclaim innocence. And then, silence. It's over in minutes. But the history of execution in America isn't just about legal processes. It's about who the system chooses to execute. And few stories illustrate that better than the tragic case of George Stinney Jr. In March 1994, in the small town of Alkaloo, South Carolina, two young white girls were found dead. Within hours, police arrested George, a 14-year-old black boy who happened to live nearby. He was interrogated alone, without a lawyer, without his parents, and without a chance. His trial lasted less than 2 hours. The all-white jury took 10 minutes to decide his fate. 10 minutes. That's less time than most people spend ordering coffee during rush hour. George was found guilty and sentenced to death by electric chair. He weighed just 95 pounds, so small that during the execution, officials had to make him sit on a Bible to fit into the chair. Witnesses said the straps were too loose. The electrode barely touched his head. When the switch was pulled, the force lifted him off the seat. It was horrific, and it happened in America under the law. 70 years later, in 2014, a South Carolina judge officially vacated George Stinney's conviction, declaring that he had been denied a fair trial. It was a symbolic victory, but one that came decades too late. His story remains one of the most chilling reminders that sometimes the system doesn't just fail, it kills before it listens. Today, over 2,500 inmates sit on death row across the United States. Many will die of old age before the state ever executes them. For every 8 people executed, 1 has been exonerated. Proof that the system, as precise as it pretends to be, is still deeply flawed. America's identity is torn between 2 ideals: the pursuit of justice and the preservation of humanity. It's the only Western democracy that still actively executes its citizens, a contradiction as loud as it is uncomfortable. But while America hides its executions behind closed prison doors in some places, death is still a public event, a warning for all to see. Number 6. Somalia, death as a spectacle. Somalia, a country where death is not hidden behind prison walls but displayed for the world to see. It's one of the most dangerous places on earth, a nation shaped by decades of war, clan rivalries, and militant control. And in the absence of consistent law and order, Somalia has embraced one of humanity's oldest and harshest forms of control: public execution. In theory, these executions serve a purpose: to deter crime and maintain some form of order in a fractured society. In reality, they're a chilling reminder of how fragile justice can be. Crimes punishable by death range from homicide and treason to espionage and military desertion. But it doesn't stop there. In some parts of Somalia, particularly under militant influence, you can be executed for leaving Islam, committing adultery, or being in a same-gender relationship. Waiting for that final moment is its own torment. Prisoners spend their last days in overcrowded, suffocating cells. There's little food, barely any light, and no illusion of hope. Their graves are often dug before the execution, a grim sign that their fate is sealed long before a bullet or a stone meets its mark. Unlike most nations that carry out executions behind closed doors, Somalia does it out in the open, a spectacle of death. Imagine a public square or a football field, surrounded by curious onlookers, soldiers, and journalists. At the center, a group of condemned men are blindfolded, tied to wooden posts, and lined up before a firing squad. A moment of silence, then the command, and the air cracks with gunfire. One of the most infamous execution sites lies in Mogadishu, Somalia's capital. On the surface, it's stunning: pristine white sand, turquoise waves, palm trees swaying in the sea breeze. But this beach hides a grim purpose. 6 concrete posts rise from the sand like gravestones. They're used to tie prisoners before execution, and later those same posts serve as goalposts when children play soccer nearby. The blood seeps into the sand, the memories fade, and the cycle begins again. It's morbidly poetic, paradise turned into purgatory. In Somalia, not all executions are carried out by the government. In fact, some of the most horrifying ones come from Al-Shabaab, the Islamist militant group that controls large parts of the country. For Al-Shabaab, executions aren't just punishment, they're theater. Crowds are summoned by loudspeaker announcements. Sometimes the events are filmed and shared online as propaganda. Town squares transform into stages of terror, where the group parades its power in full view of the people it controls. In 2017, hundreds gathered in a dusty square to witness the stoning of a man accused of adultery. His name was Dayo Mohammed Hassan, a 44-year-old who reportedly impregnated another woman while married. He was buried up to his neck, his head covered, and then the stones began to fly. One by one, the crowd watched as life drained from him. That day, Al-Shabaab called it justice. The rest of the world called it barbaric. But this wasn't an isolated case. In 2014, a teenage boy met the same fate after being accused of rape. Years before that, in 2008, a young girl, barely a teenager, was executed after being convicted of adultery. Each time the crowd gathered. Each time the message was clear: defy us and you'll die before your neighbor's eyes. Even the Somali government carries out executions, though officially through legal channels. Under the 1962 Somali Penal Code, death can be imposed for murder, treason, and espionage. Most are conducted by firing squad, often supervised by military courts, but fair trials are rare. Human rights groups have documented numerous cases of civilians, even minors, sentenced to death by military judges without proper defense or due process. In 2021, 22 executions were recorded, most in Puntland, a semi-autonomous region. The following year, that number fell to 6, still 6 too many. And then there's the problem of confessions under torture. Interrogations by Somalia's intelligence agency have long been accused of coercion and abuse. Defendants confess not because they're guilty, but because they're broken. And once that confession is on record, their fate is as good as sealed. Public executions in Somalia aren't only about justice, they're about control, a message carved into the nation's collective psyche. They serve as both warning and spectacle, ensuring obedience through terror. And for a nation where institutions are fragile and militancy runs deep, fear becomes the most reliable form of governance. It's hard not to wonder what it's like to grow up watching such scenes, to play soccer on a beach where people have died, or to hear gunfire from a public square and know it's not a celebration, but an ending. But if Somalia's brutality shocks you, what comes next may redefine the word itself: a kingdom where a single sword can silence you for sorcery. Number 5. Saudi Arabia. Death by the sword. In Saudi Arabia, justice comes swiftly, and sometimes with a single swing of a blade. This desert kingdom, home to oil wealth, holy cities, and strict interpretations of Islamic law, also holds one of the world's highest execution rates. On average, about 185 people are executed every year, though in recent times that number has climbed dramatically. 345 in 2024 alone. Here, the death penalty isn't an exception. It's part of the system, embedded in a theocracy where religion and state are indistinguishable. The result? A justice code where morality, faith, and fear intertwine in a way the rest of the world can barely comprehend. In Saudi Arabia, Sharia law isn't just a guiding principle. It is the law. Judges interpret the Quran and the Hadith to decide who lives and who dies. The crimes that can earn a person that fatal sentence range from the universally severe, like murder or treason, to the shockingly broad: adultery, same-sex relationships, drug trafficking, blasphemy, even witchcraft. Yes, witchcraft. In a nation where religion governs every breath of life, sorcery is seen not as myth but as rebellion, a threat to divine order itself. And for that, the sword is unforgiving. While other nations debate morality and justice in air-conditioned courtrooms, Saudi Arabia enforces both under the scorching Riyadh sun. At the center of Riyadh lies Dira Square, a place known to the world by a grim nickname, Chop Chop Square. It's here that the condemned are brought, blindfolded, hands bound, flanked by security forces and silent crowds. The executioner, a professional known as an al-Saf, carries a long, curved sword, polished steel designed for a single clean stroke. In theory, the process is meant to be swift, one precise swing to sever the head completely, minimizing suffering. In practice, not every strike is perfect. Witnesses have described moments when it took multiple blows before the body finally fell still. Afterward, the remains are sometimes displayed for a short while, a stark visual reminder that defying the law has consequences. It's meant as deterrence, not cruelty, at least in the government's eyes. But for onlookers, it's hard to separate the two. Beheading remains the most common method used in nearly all cases. But when swordsmen are unavailable, the state turns to firing squads, rare yet still part of the system. For adultery, the punishment grows even more harrowing: stoning. The condemned, often a woman, is buried to the chest or neck, rendered immobile. Then, stones are thrown by those gathered to witness justice. The doctrine behind it claims equality, that the stones must be small enough not to kill instantly, but large enough to inflict pain. It's a punishment as medieval as it is symbolic. The sin is crushed, publicly, piece by piece. Unlike in other nations where prisoners may linger on death row for decades, Saudi executions are carried out quickly, sometimes within months of sentencing. Prisoners are often held in isolated facilities like Al-Hayr prison, infamous for its secrecy and psychological torment. Contact with family is rare, and appeals are almost always futile. The accused, once convicted, are rarely seen again, until they appear before a crowd in Dira Square. And while the kingdom officially claimed to have abolished executions for minors, human rights groups say otherwise. One case, Mustafa al-Darwish, shook the world. Arrested at 17 for protest-related charges, he was allegedly tortured into confessing. Years later, in 2021, he was executed despite international pleas for mercy. He was just 26. His death wasn't unique. Since 2013, at least 15 minors have met the same fate. Yet, amid this unforgiving system, a strange paradox exists. Under Islamic law, the family of a murder victim can choose to forgive the killer, an act called diya, or blood money, and when they do, the condemned walks free. It's a breathtaking contrast, mercy within a system built on severity. Internationally, Saudi Arabia's justice system has drawn relentless condemnation. Human rights groups have called it archaic, cruel, and politically motivated. Yet inside the kingdom, many citizens defend it as divine justice, God's will carried out through human hands. In the East, another nation wields its own form of justice, one that hides its gallows behind silence and ritual precision. Number 4. Japan, the silent gallows. In Japan, the death penalty is reserved for the gravest of crimes: aggravated murder. Execution is by long drop hanging, an archaic method that's remained unchanged for over a century. There are only 7 execution chambers scattered across Japan, hidden behind concrete walls far from public view. When those chambers open, it's not just a life that ends, it's the final act of a system built on silence. Japan's approach to capital punishment is unlike anywhere else in the world. Prisoners aren't told when they'll die, not until a few hours before. One morning, a guard may slide open the steel door and simply say, "It's time." There are no last-minute appeals, no farewells, no countdowns, just the soft, bureaucratic efficiency of death. Families and lawyers usually find out after it's over, often through a brief phone call or a notice in the mail. Officials say the secrecy spares distress. In truth, it's a cruelty of anticipation, an endless cycle of waking up every day not knowing if it's your last. Before and after each execution, officials perform quiet rituals. The room is cleaned, the ropes are checked, and multiple officers press buttons simultaneously so that none can know whose hand triggered the fall. It's death by design, engineered to feel like no one's fault. To understand this system, you have to understand Japan itself, a society where honor, control, and restraint are woven into the fabric of life. Even death follows protocol. Those sentenced to die spend years, sometimes decades, in solitary confinement, waiting. Cells are small and bright, with strict rules about posture and silence. Prisoners must sit upright for long hours and may not even turn their heads freely. The monotony is mind-breaking. Human rights observers call it the death row phenomenon, a psychological torment so intense it strips people of their sense of time. For the condemned, the punishment isn't only in the execution, it's in the waiting. Surprisingly, public support for the death penalty remains strong. Around 80% of Japanese citizens believe it's necessary. For many, it's viewed as justice served with quiet dignity. But behind that calm surface lies a darker truth. Japan's government releases almost no information about executions. Dates are often scheduled when parliament is in recess to avoid debate, Media access is restricted, and because of the secrecy, there's little public scrutiny or accountability. This silence has drawn sharp criticism from human rights organizations. They argue that secrecy and psychological cruelty make Japan's system one of the most inhumane among developed nations. Experts have testified that it can take up to 2 minutes for consciousness to fade after the drop, a grim choking interval between life and oblivion. Still, Japan's Supreme Court insists hanging isn't cruel, reserving that term for methods like burning or decapitation. Then there's the haunting possibility that some of the executed may have been innocent. Japan's 99% conviction rate has long raised eyebrows, with critics pointing to forced confessions and flawed interrogations. One man, Iwao Hakamada, spent nearly 50 years on death row before being exonerated in 2014. Half a century waiting to die for a crime he didn't commit. And yet nowhere is the machinery of death more vast or more secretive than in the world's most populous nation. Number 3. China, the execution superpower. If death had an assembly line, it would be in China. Every year, more people are executed in China than in the rest of the world combined. Thousands of lives quietly ended by the state. Some for murder, some for corruption, others for crimes against the state. In a country where the conviction rate hovers around 99%, once you're accused, your fate is practically sealed. Guilt isn't proven, it's assumed. For those sentenced to die, justice moves fast, too fast. Sometimes it's a matter of days between verdict and execution. A frightening level of efficiency that leaves no room for appeal, doubt, or mercy. China officially relies on 2 methods of execution: lethal injection and the firing squad. The firing squad, long the image of state punishment, was supposedly phased out in 2010, but reports suggest it never fully disappeared. It simply retreated to the rural provinces, where secrecy is easier and questions fewer. Lethal injection has become the preferred method, not because it's more humane, but because it's more efficient and discreet. And in China, efficiency is everything. But even that wasn't enough. This brings us to the death vans. These so-called death vans began appearing in the early 2000s. They're designed to deliver death in minutes. No prison transfer, no public spectacle, no trace. Inside, the condemned is strapped to a bed, an IV inserted, and with the push of a button, a lethal injection ends their life. Cameras inside the van allow officials to watch the execution remotely or record it. The government claims these vans are cost-effective and convenient. After all, it's cheaper to drive the execution to the prisoner than build new facilities. But critics point out the obvious. These vans make executions faster, quieter, and harder to track. Death can now be dispatched like a delivery, and there's a darker allegation, one that makes these vans sound more like harvesters than vehicles of justice. Human rights groups have long accused China of using executed prisoners' organs for transplants, often without consent. In 2009, the government itself admitted that over 65% of all organ transplants came from executed prisoners. Since then, officials have claimed reforms and new systems for voluntary donation, but independent observers say the numbers still don't add up. The mobile vans, critics argue, make organ harvesting easier. They allow immediate extraction, preserve organ viability, and erase evidence before questions can be asked. The Chinese government denies it, of course, but in a country where execution statistics are classified as a state secret, it's hard to separate fact from fiction or propaganda. Before execution, prisoners endure brutal conditions. Many are held in overcrowded or solitary cells, heads shaved, eyes down, working up to 16 hours a day in forced labor. Speaking out, making eye contact, or breaking even minor rules can result in beatings or punishment. Capital punishment in China isn't new, it's rooted in history. Since the dynastic era, death was one of the 5 punishments. The legalists endorsed it as necessary for order, while the Confucians preached mercy and moral correction. In today's China, both philosophies seem to coexist. Strict law on paper, ruthless order in practice. The government insists it's moving toward reducing the use of the death penalty, but data tells another story. In 2022, Amnesty International estimated at least 80,000 executions took place in China. That's 8,000 names erased, none officially recorded. To the outside world, China's system of capital punishment seems less about justice and more about maintaining authority through fear. But in one of the world's most isolated nations, death isn't hidden, it's displayed for all to fear. Number 2. North Korea. Execution as terror. If you thought China's system of death was chilling, wait till you step into North Korea, a country where execution isn't just punishment. It's theater, it's terror. It's the state's way of whispering to its people, obey or vanish. In North Korea, death is public policy. Executions are designed not to serve justice but to remind every citizen that the regime sees everything, and mercy doesn't exist. Trials, if you can even call them that, are over in minutes. The verdict? Always predetermined. The accused stands before a panel of judges and security officers, trembling as the charges are read. Theft, treason, watching a foreign movie, criticizing the leadership, even not crying enough at a dictator's funeral. Then comes the chilling phrase defectors remember word for word. This is not a matter of forgiveness. It is a crime against the state. He must die. That's it. No defense, no appeal, no delay. Within hours, sometimes minutes, the condemned is dragged to an open field, a schoolyard, or even a factory lot. Posters go up in advance. Workplaces are told to attend. Attendance isn't technically mandatory, but try skipping one and see how long before the secret police come knocking. Children line up next to their parents. Soldiers stand at attention. Officials watch with clipboards. This isn't about justice. It's about control through spectacle. Executions unfold with brutal precision. The prisoner is bound, arms, legs, even the torso. Sometimes blindfolded, sometimes gagged to silence any last words. Then, before the gathered crowd, a senior officer reads the charges again, loud and clear. This man betrayed his nation. The condemned is placed before a firing squad, usually 4 to 6 policemen brought in from another region so they don't recognize the victim. Each marks a target: chest, head, limbs. At the signal, the rifles crack in unison. Sometimes they don't even use bullets to kill. They use them to humiliate. In one documented case, a rope held a man suspended above a cart. The officer ordered a guard to shoot the rope, sending the lifeless body crashing down. Hangings are also common. In smaller towns, prisoners are strung up on poles or cranes, their bodies left swaying for days, a grotesque warning to anyone passing by. And for high-profile traitors, rumors speak of anti-aircraft guns. Yes, anti-aircraft guns. Because in North Korea, even death has to be dramatic. For those who escape the bullet, there's another kind of death, slow, silent, and hidden behind barbed wire. North Korea's political prison camps, known as kwanliso, are sprawling complexes where entire families are sent for the crimes of one person. A father criticizes the government, his wife and children vanish too. It's called guilt by association. Inside these camps, life expectancy is measured in months. Starvation is routine. Prisoners break rocks until their hands bleed, then are beaten for not bleeding fast enough. Torture isn't just interrogation, it's daily life. A 2014 United Nations report described the system with chilling clarity. Extermination, enslavement, torture, rape, forced abortion, and deliberate starvation. That's not hyperbole. That's North Korea's reality. By some estimates, over 200,000 people are imprisoned in these camps. Many never charged, never tried, never seen again. Getting information out of North Korea is almost impossible. Defectors risk death to tell their stories, smuggling out whispers of horror. Executions in schoolyards, soldiers forcing families to watch, children crying as their parents' bodies are carried away. Foreign journalists are heavily monitored. Even humanitarian workers are banned from entering restricted regions. Every report, every image is filtered through layers of propaganda. The government insists that the so-called human rights abuses are Western lies. But the evidence, the testimonies, the satellite images, the survivors, says otherwise. In a nation where even thought can be a crime, silence is survival. But even after all this, one nation remains, where executions are both punishment and performance, wrapped in faith and fear. Number 1. Iran. Death by faith and fear. If you think waiting in line is bad, try waiting for your own execution. For weeks, months, sometimes years. That's the grim reality for prisoners on death row in Iran. After being sentenced, they're left in a cruel limbo, never told when the end will come. It might be next week, it might be next year. The decision must first climb the bureaucratic ladder, approved by the Supreme Court, and finally signed off by the head of the judiciary. On paper, it sounds procedural. In practice, it's psychological torture. Technically, lawyers are supposed to be notified 48 hours before the execution. But in Iran, technically doesn't mean much, especially in political cases. Most of the time, prisoners are yanked from their cells in the dead of night, thrown into solitary confinement, and shackled to the floor. They know what that means. The clock has started ticking. Inside the isolation cells, time loses meaning. The air is hot and stale. Blankets reek of sweat, vomit, and urine. The food, when it arrives, is so foul most prisoners would rather starve. There's no running water, no sunlight, and barely enough air to breathe. Some have to wash their hands in toilet bowls. Iran's execution methods vary: hanging, firing squad, crucifixion, even stoning, but hanging is by far the most common. Most take place behind prison walls, away from the public eye, but when the government wants to send a message, they go big. That's when the cranes roll in. Public executions are staged in city squares or outside prisons. The condemned are blindfolded, hands and feet bound, sometimes still bruised from interrogation. They're lifted into the air by crane, or the platform beneath them drops away. There's no trapdoor, no quick snap. The rope tightens, and the body struggles. It can take minutes for death to arrive, and all the while, the crowd watches. The message is the same with other controlling nations. This is what happens when you defy the system. Here's where it gets even darker. For prisoners convicted of murder, Iran's law gives the victim's family the power to decide their fate, just like in Saudi Arabia and other Islamic nations. They can choose to forgive, often in exchange for diya, blood money. Sounds merciful, right? But in reality, it's a cruel illusion. The family is brought in at the final moment, asked whether they want to grant forgiveness. Most don't, and the rope is tightened. The ritual is chilling. The judge reads out the sentence. The family is invited to speak. Then a signal is given. The executioner does his job. The crowd disperses, and life, somehow, goes on. Sometimes mercy comes from unexpected places. In 2006, a young man named Sina Paymard stood at the gallows, noose around his neck. When asked for his final wish, he asked to play the ney, a traditional flute. His music moved the victim's family so deeply that they chose forgiveness. He was spared, barely, but such moments are rare. More often, the condemned are nameless, faceless, and forgotten. Iran's death penalty covers an astonishing range of crimes, from murder and rape to political dissent, adultery, apostasy, and even spreading corruption on earth. It's a system where sin and crime blend together, and religion becomes the language of authority. In recent years, executions have skyrocketed, over 900 in 2024 alone, more than any country except China. That's 74% of all recorded executions in the world. In one single week, 40 people were hanged. Think about that. 40 human lives ended without breaking sweat. Even minors aren't safe. Iran remains one of the last countries on earth to execute child offenders, those convicted of crimes committed before age 18. Some are kept in prison until they're old enough to hang. It's the kind of fact that makes you pause mid-sentence because it sounds medieval and yet it's happening now. These people have described a sound they'll never forget, the footsteps before dawn. That's when the guards come. There's no shouting, no announcement, just a jingle of keys, the scraping of metal doors, and a name. The prisoner knows it's over. They're allowed a 10-minute farewell, sometimes still shackled and filthy. When the time's up, guards drag their families away, often literally. There's a brief reading of the sentence, maybe a plea for mercy, and then silence. The body falls, the crowd exhales, the rope sways, and somewhere in the quiet after, another prisoner lies awake in his cell, staring at the ceiling, wondering if tomorrow will be his turn. So from the deserts of Iran to the cities of America, one truth echoes through every execution chamber. Is there really a winner in the death sentence? Because in the end, the death penalty reveals far more about the living than it ever does about the dead. What's your take on this? Share your perspective in the comments section. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.